This video is brought to you by The Radical Centrist, a page for individuals who are sick and tired of lies and nonsense from both sides and are ready to engage in spirited conversations with an open mind and, above all, with mutual respect for one another. In this video, we're going to talk about police violence, and we're going to compare which states have a bigger problem than other states. What we're going to do is we're actually going to compare not only shootings and what states that they happen in, but we're going to compare how that matches up to the demographics of that state and also how it matches up to the violent crime rates in each individual state. And we're going to give the fairest comparison of how states match up against each other. And at the end, we're going to rank all of the states, the best versus the worst in terms of police violence. So coming into this, we're going to challenge three assumptions. The first assumption is that all states have the same aggressive policing approaches and results. The second assumption that we're going to challenge is that states with high violent crime rates will have more violent police responses. The third assumption is that more aggressive policing tactics lead to lower violent crime rates in that particular state. So these are the three assumptions that we're going to challenge in this video. There's three sets of data that we're going to need in order to make this comparison. The first one is the population statistics for each state, which we will get from the U.S. Census Bureau. This is the United States Census Bureau website. It's very easy to use. You just type in a particular state. In this case, we'll try Alaska, and that will give you the population demographics for that particular state. So we're going to go through each individual state and then capture that data into our Excel spreadsheet. So we flip over to our Excel spreadsheet. We've now added two columns. The first column is the population of each individual state. The second column is the rank from largest to smallest. You can see that California has the most, about 40 million. And we can scroll down and see that the smallest population state is Wyoming with just over 500,000. So that's 50 states plus Washington, D.C. Okay, for the second piece of data that we're going to need is the violent crime rates for each state. And for this data, we're going to flip over to the FBI.gov website. So this is a report that's produced every year by the Criminal Justice Information Services Division. It's the most comprehensive and the most reliable database for crime statistics in the United States. This report takes about 2 years to put together. So the most recent that's been completed is 2018. So we're going to go through the 2018 report here, Table 4, to pull all of the information that we need. So you'll see here that there's each individual region and also state. There's violent crime rates, murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, property crime, and more. But what we're going to look at is the overall violent crime rate per 100,000 capita in each state. So we can scroll down here and we can see, for example, we've got Maine. Maine is 112. We can see Massachusetts is 338. That's the data that we need in order to assess the violent crime rates in each individual state. So we flip back to our Excel spreadsheet here. You can see that we've added two columns for violent crime per 100,000 capita. And you can see that there's also a ranking for how that violent crime rate compares to other states. So now we're actually going to sort the data so that we can see how these states compare to each other. And now we have sorted the data so that it shows the violent crime rates per capita of each state from the worst all the way down to the best. So you can see that the highest violent crime rate per capita in the United States is Washington, D.C., and then Alaska, New Mexico, Tennessee. You can see that the violent crime rates decrease all the way down to Georgia, which has the lowest violent crime rate in the United States. So that's the 50 states plus Washington, D.C., all organized in order of the violent crime rates per capita. Okay, the third piece of data that we're going to need is the police fatal use of force rates for each of those states. For this, we're going to flip over to the Fatal Force Index to find that data. This is the Fatal Force Index, which is a conglomeration of data that's been put together over the last few years that shows all of the police killings that have occurred in each of those locations. So the Washington Post has done a great job of organizing this into an easily searchable database. So you can come down here and you can click on a state. Let's pick a big state like Texas. And we can see that out of the total that were killed by police in this year, 108 of those took place in Texas. We can take a look at another state like Tennessee. We can see that in Tennessee in the same year, 33 of those were killed in Tennessee. So we're going to pull the data from each individual state and add that to our database. Okay, we'll flip back over to our Excel spreadsheet and you can see that we've now added three columns for those killed by police. The first column is the total number of individuals killed in that state during that year. and then the per 100,000 capita comparison. And then there's a rank to show how each of these states compares with one another. So now we're going to sort these in order of the greatest to the smallest. And you can see now that we've got all of the states organized in the number 1 in terms of the highest number of police killings per capita, all the way down to the lowest. So you can see that New Hampshire has the highest, followed by Iowa, Washington, Utah, Nebraska, all the way down to the lowest, which is Virginia and Kentucky and California. The best way to show a fair comparison is to put these two pieces of data next to each other. So first, we're going to talk about violent crime rates per capita for each of the individual states. So you can see on this chart, we've taken the violent crime rates represented by the orange square, and we've organized them from the highest all the way down to the lowest, the highest being Washington, D.C., followed by Alaska and New Mexico, all the way down to the lowest violent crime rates per capita, which would be Georgia. So now we've got all of these laid out nicely in a line, and we can see how these states compare to each other. But in order to really understand how the police response to these violent crime rates shows, we have to overlay the data on top of each other. So now we've overlaid red X's, and each of these individual red X's shows the police killings per capita in each of those individual states. And you can start to see how the different states compare with one another. So the first thing we're going to notice as we look at individual states is that their violent crime rates, represented by the orange square, oftentimes differ greatly from the red X, which shows the police violence or fatal use of force in that particular state. Some of them, in fact, vary greatly. So let's take a look, for example, at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, you can see, has a moderate to moderately high violent crime rate, but you can see that the police killings per capita rate is much, much higher. And that tells us that there's a bit of a mismatch here in this state. You can see another example here being Colorado. In Colorado, we've got a moderate violent crime rate, but a pretty high police killing rate. Another good example would be West Virginia. West Virginia has a fairly low violent crime rate and yet has one of the highest police killing rates per capita. So any of the dots that appear above this line here should be very concerning. This tells us that these states have a big mismatch in terms of the violent crime rates in their state and the police fatal use of force happening in that state. Now, we've also got a second group of states, and this second group of states seems to be that the police killing rates more closely follow the violent crime rates in that state. And you can see that the red X is a lot closer in terms of the disparity between these two data sets. However, we should not think necessarily that justifies the police use of force. And the reason we can say that is because there's a third group of states which are down here. This third group of states are showing that there's the ability to have even lower rates of police killing per capita. Let's take a look at a couple examples. First of all, we've got D.C. We talked about how Washington, D.C. had the highest per capita violent crime rate in the nation, and yet you'll notice that they have one of the lowest rates of police killings in the nation. That's an amazing difference, and that really tells us something good is happening in Washington, D.C. You'll see, for example, another is Alabama. Alabama has relatively high violent crime rate compared to other states, and yet it's still one of the lower in terms of police killings per capita. And again, you'll see here Michigan, Delaware, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. North Dakota has none. Rhode Island has none. So you can see that these states seem to be well ahead of other states in terms of the disparity between the violent crime rate and the police killing rate in that state. So from this, we can compare each of these individual states, and you can look and see where your state falls on this map to see if there might be a serious problem in your state. So now that we have that data, it's the moment of truth where we reveal the top 10 worst states for police violence. This means the highest disparity between violent crime rates versus the police use of violence in that state. Coming in at number 1 is West Virginia with the highest disparity. Number 2, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Georgia, Vermont, Hawaii, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, and Washington, rounding out the top 10. These are states that have a very high disparity between the violent crime rates and the police use of force. We can take a look at the next 10 That's Arkansas, Oregon, Utah, all the way down through Arizona. These are the top 20 states that seem to have the greatest disparity between violent crime rates and police use of violence. On a positive note, let's take a look at the top 10 states with the least police violence. This is the lowest disparity between violent crime rates and police violence. Number 1, Washington, D.C. Number 2, Delaware. Number 3, Michigan, Illinois, Alabama, North Dakota, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. And rounding out the top 20, we've got Nevada, Maryland, all the way down through Florida. So if your state appears on this list, hopefully near the top of the list, it means that they have the lowest disparity between violent crime rates in that state versus the police use of fatal force in that state. So based on that, we can come to some conclusions. We need to look back at our assumptions. The first assumption, all states have the same aggressive policing approaches and results. Clearly, we can see from the data that that is definitely false. The number 2 assumption was that states with high violent crime rates will have more violent police responses, and yet we find that there's almost no correlation between the violent crime rates in some states and the violent police responses in those states. Number 3, more aggressive policing tactics lead to lower violent crime rates in that state. Again, as we saw in that chart, there's little to no correlation between the violent crime rates in a given state and the police aggressiveness and use of force in that state. So this also has to be false. This video was put together by the Radical Centrist. If you're interested in joining the conversation, please add us on Facebook. You can like our page. Or if you have any other data that you see out there that looks suspicious and you'd like for us to take a look at it, please send us an email at that email below.